Good morning, this is Angela with Park Rose Permaculture. I am hiding in the shade of my Cecile Brunner rose. And I wanted to talk with you all today about the concept of opening up a canopy. So in permaculture, if you were doing food foresting, forest gardens, and you are trying to establish and set up a perennial agricultural system in which trees are your dominant crop, you eventually get what's called a closed canopy, which is when your system is matured and all the trees are reaching in and basically touching each other, and you have a woodland or forest situation. And that can be really great. I talked in one of my recent videos about how important that succession is for creating shade and conserving water and setting up windbreaks and microclimates, even on a property as small as my 1/4 acre here in Portland, Oregon. However, today I want to talk about what happens when you open up the canopy and how sometimes good management of our permaculture systems includes being a force of disturbance in which we open up the canopy to benefit certain plants or elements in our system. So let me show you down here at the back of my yard what I'm talking about. So I have to walk this gauntlet of golden raspberries that are on either side of this pathway down to my chicken coop. I love to put things where I will utilize them, and if I put berries along my pathway, I know that I am going to access them on my strolls through the garden. So as we move farther down, you can see that this area is quite open and sunny. I used to have raspberries all the way down to the chicken coop, and it was just too many. It was too many raspberries for our family, and so I cycled them out, and I'm now starting to put in more shrubs in this area. I actually had a Tibetan cherry here, and it died. Really disappointed. It was hard to source one. When I ordered it, it wasn't very good looking, and I was worried it wasn't going to make it, and it didn't, and the company gave me my money back, but just frustrating because I still haven't been able to source a Tibetan cherry. I wanted sort of a shady meditation area here eventually, and I'm not quite sure what other tree I'm going to put. I would love to source another Tibetan cherry in the future, but for now I have young June berries and a mature blueberry that I put in to kind of build up the shrubby layer of food producing crops here. But eventually this will be a closed canopy. For now, super sunny. Just put down some leaf mold around these, and then I will be putting chop and drop mulch over. So when we talk about a closed canopy, we are talking about the opposite of what I'm standing in right now. We're talking about an area where the trees have provided cover and are basically touching each other, and only dappled sunlight gets through. That's great for a lot of perennial crops, a lot of things that thrive in a woodland setting. This high bush cranberry was everywhere, leaning all the way out and touching my Strawberry Hill rose, and touching the chicken coop. And so I couldn't get through this path, so I chop and dropped a bunch of that back just for access. But at the same time, the large branches here were shading plants that really need access to sun. So I've talked before about how pioneer species generally like full sun and poor disturbed soil. That is not unique to annual crops. There are many perennial pioneer species that need the same things, including this plant here, Hippophyra rhamnoides, which is the sea buckthorn or seaberry. So what I ended up here is in a situation where my high bush cranberry was shading this female and this female. With sea buckthorn, what you get with any amount of shade is you get dieback. In fact, you can see here in the male, they die back from the shade of their own branches. So the middle tends to get very dead where it shades itself. Needs full sun. Now, why do I have these 2 little females and this big male? This male was sold to me along with 2 other plants that were both supposed to be females. I had them in the ground for a number of years, and when they flowered for the first time, they all flowered with male flowers. I was very, very, very disappointed. So I had to rip out the 2 that were supposed to be females and replace them with different ones from One Green World Nursery, where I know the quality of their stock, and these will be females. They do have female flowers on them, but it means that my male is much bigger, and he's going to get a pretty good prune back. The leaves of this make an edible tea for medicinal tea for humans and an edible crop for chickens and ducks. So when we're thinking about a closed canopy layer, when we're thinking about the shade and water conservation that we get out of mature big shrubs and trees in our system, we need to be aware of what are the needs of the support plants in our system. My sea buckthorn here is a nitrogen fixer and produces a very rich, oily fruit, very, very high in vitamin C in the late fall. And I want to make sure it gets what it needs. So while it's okay for it to coexist with this very large high bush cranberry, which I probably wouldn't have put in if I had known it was going to get this big, it will get a big take back this fall. I need to make sure that I'm diligent about doing chop and drop here. I need to make sure that I am mimicking browsers in the forest by reducing the higher branches and dropping them onto the forest floor. And that way I'm opening up the area to sunlight. Let me show you what else I mean. So as you come back here, you can see it's very shady in this area. And before I did that chop and drop there, all of that over those sea buckthorn was also very shady. I also had a similar situation going on back here with my early Fuyu persimmon. Next to it, I have a Gummyberry Elaeagnus multiflora, nitrogen fixer companion plant for this persimmon guild. Unfortunately, much like my sea buckthorn, it requires full sun. So what you get is it got real scraggly looking down below because the high bush cranberry and the persimmon were both shading it too much. So I limbed it up quite a bit and dropped it as chop and drop mulch, which will release nitrogen as it decomposes under my Fuyu persimmon. And I also took back some branches of my persimmon here. I was careful to select branches that do not have fruit on them, flower buds on them. I took out a branch here to open up some more sun to come in here and access these gummies up here in the corner. So that way my nitrogen fixing gummy companion plant in this guild can still persist. It isn't totally shaded out because I still want it, but I am able to have a mature persimmon growing here at the same time. Just a little bit of maintenance, a little bit of removing the elements that are adding too much shade and preserving some of the sun filtration so that those plants that need additional sun can go ahead and succeed in this spot. You can see here more of the buds on my early Fuyu persimmon. Persimmons are very late to leaf out and late to flower. There's going to be a ridiculous crop of them this year, I hope. So as we look back across this part of the garden, you can see here how we have this area of intense sun because there is no overstory canopy tree here yet. There is just some of the newly established shrubby edible crops and an herbaceous layer of comfrey and mint and a few other things in here as well. But eventually there will be an overstory tree here too, and I will need to continue to do some chop and drop because while a closed canopy may be ideal for certain permaculture food forest situations, there are times when it's really, really not, and we want to preserve that sun access, especially if you are like me and you have a small plot. I only have a 1/4 acre. So ideally, if I had a different system, all my sea buckthorn would be in a windbreak on a miserably poor, very sunny, windy spot in my garden, out apart from everything else. But this is the only space I've got. This was the worst quality soil in my whole yard when I started. Gets very, very intense sun back here. Seemed like a good spot. But as these other plants have matured, I have realized that there has to be some maintenance to preserve the high density planting in my system, and that's okay. So if you're working on having an intensely cultivated small plot of land, or even a large farm where your intercropping requires the filtration of a little bit more sunlight down into the bottom of your woodland areas or your forest garden, by taking the time to hack back material as you go through the garden, when you're harvesting or just strolling it, you are mimicking those browsers and you are dropping material to the forest floor, to the garden floor. That will become more humus, but you are also opening up, and the canopy, you are opening up the garden to sunlight so that those plants that need it have access to it and can produce more for you. So if you got something out of this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing and check out my Patreon in the description. I'll be back.